Matthew 24. We went through this a little bit a few weeks ago, but if you see in verse 27, we talked about the issue of, says, "For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." And we talked about the fact that they're going to notice it, right? It's going to be a noticeable thing. A lot of times what people will do is they'll take that and say, well, he's coming from the east going to the west across the sky, and there's some other things that go along with that. But the idea there is they're going to see it. And that's why you see verse 29, he says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." That verse 29, we talked about that a little bit last week. Remember, immediately after the tribulation of those days, so that shall the sun be darkened. It's the same thing that you see over there in Acts chapter 20, right? We talked about that a little bit. Or Acts chapter 2. I don't know why I said 20. Acts chapter 2, when they're talking about the signs that they see in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost, they're talking about in verse 17, where Peter's quoting Joel, and he says, "And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaidens I will pour out in those days of my spirit, and they shall prophesy." And we talked about that, the issue that those things have been fulfilled, at that particular time. But starting off in verse 19, it says, "And I will show wonders in heaven above, and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before that great and notable day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." So when we see this over in verse 29, in Matthew 24, 29, and verse 30 over here, specifically 29, where he says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days, so that shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light." When we talk about and we see all that stuff, we deal with the fact that during that tribulation period, right? We've got a tribulation period that's taking place. We've talked about, we've already passed the midpoint section at that particular time. We're over at this point where they see Jesus Christ coming, and then they see him, right? Verse 30, "And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven." Well, when does the sign of the Son of Man appear? According to the context, it's what? Immediately after the tribulation of those days, right? So when they see that, when are they going to see it? They're going to see it immediately after the tribulation of those days. Okay? Now, he says, "And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn." Well, if all the tribes of the earth mourn, who all sees him? All of them, right? Otherwise, all the tribes of the earth wouldn't mourn. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now, there's a few things about that issue that I wanted to make sure that we're able to take a look at. That issue of the sun being dark and the moon not giving light, the stars falling from heaven, the powers that be, or the powers of heaven being shaken, and the tribes mourn, and they're going to see the Son of Man and all that stuff. Go over to Malachi chapter 4. Malachi chapter 4. There's some things that I want you to kind of think about as we're going through here. In Malachi chapter 4, verse 1, when you take a look at verse 1 here, he says, "For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise." Now, what do you notice about that Son of Righteousness there? This is what we call think time. It's not that hard. What do you notice about the S on Son? It's capitalized, right? So what's that tell us? If it's capitalized, what's it going to be? It's a name, right? If you notice that you've got Son of Righteousness, S-U-N, right? Hold your place there and go over to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. Notice here in verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night. Behold, the four winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. Notice there when he says, I saw in my vision by what? Night. Now, one of the things that we've talked about in the past, when Jesus Christ is gone, he was the what? Light. When he goes, what do we find out that ourselves, what do we find that we're in is darkness, right? And so then it's the nighttime, and then one of the things that he says is the light's going to go, and you're going to be left in darkness. Now that's what we see there. Notice here in Malachi chapter 4, verse 2. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness, what? Arise. So when does the Son of Righteousness arise? Guess what happens? Sun comes back. Light comes back, right? With what? Healing in his wings. You know, one of the great things about not just his earthly ministry, but his second coming, what is Christ going to bring? Healing. And it's not just spiritual type stuff, but it's a physical healing, right? With healing in his wings, and he shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall, and he shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet. In the day that I shall do this, saith the Lord of hosts. Remember ye the law of Moses my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb, for all Israel with the statutes and judgments. Notice in verse 5, Behold, I will send you Elijah, the prophet, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. How is it that this is going to, how's this going to start off? What's happening first according to verse 5? What's he doing? I'm going to send Elijah, right? Well, what do we find out? Who is it that we find out a little bit later on came in the spirit of Elijah? John the Baptist, right? So when we see these things, but notice, but I will send you Elijah, the prophet, when? Before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, right? So when's he going to come? Before the day, right? So one of the things that we see over here is this issue of that darkness and all that stuff that takes place. He's already sent Elijah. John the Baptist shows up there as him, right? Go over to Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1, notice here in verse 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John, who bare record of the word of God and of the testimony of Jesus Christ and of all things that he saw. Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is what? At hand. Drop down to verse 9. He says, I, John, who also am your brother and companion in tribulation and the kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was in the isle that was called Patmos for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. Notice, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. Where was John? In the Spirit, he was taken where? Out in the future to do what? To talk about these things, right? What's he talking about there? Verse 10, he says, and I was in the Spirit on the what? The Lord's day, and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet, saying, I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. And what thou seest, write in a book, and send it unto the 7 churches which are in Asia, unto Ephesus, and unto Smyrna, and unto Pergamos, and unto Thyatira, and unto Sardis, and unto Philadelphia, and unto Laodicea. By the way, if he's over in the Lord's day, which is all this stuff over here, and he says, what I want you to do is write this down in a book for 7 churches, where do we know that those 7 churches are going to fit during that time? Right? What a lot of people do is they'll go get the Laodicea church and say, well, that's us. You're neither hot nor cold and all that stuff, and God's going to spit you out, and that's a good Baptist verse to beat people over the head with. Get to working, right? Right? But that's what they'll do. He's not talking about church ages, because that's where a lot of people get that. He's talking about what? 7 actual churches that are going to be in existence when? In the Lord's day. They're going to be over there, right? Now, the entire book of Revelation is about the Lord's day, and it also includes that tribulation period. Go back to Isaiah chapter 13. Isaiah chapter 13. Now, we've talked about some of those things. We spent a little bit more time last week dealing with some of that stuff, right? About us. That none of that stuff's anything that we have to worry about as far as living through it, right? Notice here, Isaiah chapter 13. Let's just start at verse 6. He says, notice, howl ye, for the day of the Lord is what? At hand. So where are we in Isaiah chapter 13? We're in the midst of that Lord's day, or the day of the Lord there. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. Therefore shall all hands be faint, and every man's heart shall melt. Now drop down to verse 9. He says, notice, behold, the day of the Lord cometh, cruel, both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. What's that remind us of? Matthew 24, right? Immediately after the tribulation of those days. Notice, continue. He says, the sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. Again, that's that Matthew 24 stuff, right? Verse 11. And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked of their iniquity, and I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a man more precious than fine gold, even a man that the golden wedge of Ophir. Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place. Now again, what do we see about the powers, or the heavens are going to do? They're going to be shaken, right? Same thing. Same thing that we see over in Matthew 24. In the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger, and it shall be as the chased roe, and as a sheep that no man taketh up, they shall every man turn to his own people, and flee every one into his own land. Now, where we are is we're back over there. Second coming, all the stuff that's taking place over there. You've also got the tribulations part of that. Jump over to chapter 24. Isaiah chapter 24. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 16. Notice what we've got here. Verse 16, he says, "From the uttermost part of the earth have we heard songs, even glory to the righteous. But I said, my leanness, woe unto me. The treacherous dealers have dealt treacherously, yea, the treacherous dealers have dealt very treacherously. Fear and the pit and the snares are upon thee, O inhabitant of the earth. And it shall come to pass that he who fleeth from the noise of the fear shall fall into the pit, and he that cometh up out of the midst of the pit shall be taken in the snare, for the windows from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth do shake. The earth is utterly broken down, and the earth is clean dissolved. The earth is moved exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard." The same thing we just read back in Isaiah 13, right? "And it shall be removed like a cottage, and the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it, and it shall fall and not rise again. And it shall come to pass," that's over there at the second coming, "it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall punish the hosts of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth." What's he doing during that day? Cleaning everything out in the heavens and cleaning everything out in the earth, right? And of course, that's all going to be that during that second coming. Verse 22, "And they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and they shall be shut up in the prison. And after many days shall they be visited. Then the moon shall be confounded, and the sun ashamed, when the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem before his ancients gloriously." What's he talking about there at the very end? What's he going to do? He's going to reign. So he's going to come back. What's he going to do? He's taking care of the heavens already. He's taking care of the earth. And what he's going to do is he's going to set up that kingdom out there, right? Now, when we talk about those things with the Malachi chapter 4 and Isaiah 13 and Isaiah 24 and Revelation 1 and put all that stuff together, when we talk about that stuff, he's talking about all that's that second coming. They're all second coming verses, right? Go over to, let's do this. Go over to Ezekiel 32. Oh. Wrong way. Ezekiel 32. Ezekiel 32. And what do we see is we're going to see darkness all the way through this, right? Notice here in Ezekiel 32. Let's notice the context here. Verse 1, "And it came to pass in the 12th year, in the 12th month, in the first day of the month, that the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and say unto him, Thou art like a young lion of the nations, and thou art as a whale in the seas, and thou camest forth with thy rivers, and troublest the waters, and thy feet, and foulest their rivers." So who is it that Ezekiel's writing this to? Is who? Pharaoh, king of Egypt. What do we know that Egypt is in Scripture? It's a picture of the world and the Antichrist and all the stuff that's going to be taking place there. Notice this. Drop down to verse 7. He says, "And when I shall put thee out, I will cover the heaven and make the stars thereof" what? "Dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light." Same types of things that we've seen so far, right? "All the bright lights of heaven will I make dark over thee, and set darkness upon thy land, saith the Lord God. I will also vex the hearts of many people when I shall bring thy destruction among the nations into the countries which thou hast not known. Yea, I will make many people amazed at thee, and their kings shall be horribly afraid for thee, when I shall brandish my sword before them, and they shall tremble at every moment, every man for his own life in the day of thy fall." And for thus saith the Lord God, the sword of the king of Babylon shall come upon thee. And he goes on down through there. Now he's talking to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, but also what he's dealing with is what? You see those connections that we see with Matthew 24 and Acts chapter 2 and the verses that we've talked about so far, right? About the bright lights of heaven and the sun and the moon and stars and all that stuff. Jeremiah chapter 13. Well, yeah, and it's like we talked about last time. Is like it's a darkness that can be felt, right?
But I mean, that's happening in the second half of the tribulation.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's when it's
yeah, coming in through that part, yeah. And really, every one of these passages are the second coming. That's going to be because they're asking, "What's the sign of thy coming?" Right? You're going to be in complete and total darkness. You're in darkness because the light's gone, but this is going to be complete total darkness by the time he comes back. So much so, like I said, that it can be felt. Well, there would be some saved, but it's going to be a mess. Probably not all of them, because even then, like you talk about, you see, like there's still going to be people that's going to be getting saved out there. Probably not a lot. I don't know how many that would be, but I mean, he's coming back to fix it, right? And that's what he's doing. And when we talk about remember in Matthew 24 when he talks about the destruction that's not been seen since the world began. Well, when you read Genesis 1:2, what's it say? The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, right? And when we talked about that darkness a long time ago, when we think about the structure of, if you want to call it the universe, that whole thing's dark. If you go off, you can go check this out just by watching a National Geographic type video. You go and look at when they go into the water, the deeper you go, what happens? The darker it gets. So much so that they get cameras down there and you can see life that has no pigment because light can't get there, right? You talk about darkness. That's that. Yeah. Yeah, and can you imagine being in darkness where, if we shut off all the lights here, give you about 2 or 3 minutes, your eyes will adjust. This is darkness that you're not going to be able to adjust to.
Thinking of it like that, talking about the darkness, sheds more light on verse 2 in Genesis 1.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no sun, there's no moon, there's no stars. I can't imagine how dark that is.
And when he says darkness was on the face of the deep, that's the top. He says darkness was there. All the way down is just more and more darkness.
And then the other verse what was it? Something not since the beginning of the world.
Destruction since the beginning of the world. Yeah. I mean, you think about that stuff, and it is when you go over to Egypt, and again, we talk about that with what we just got through reading in Ezekiel, right? When you think about that stuff, go over to Jeremiah 13 while we're going there. When you think about that was a darkness that could be felt, right? Get Jeremiah 13. Also grab Genesis. Genesis 15. Well, and the thing too is if you're and you think about this, whether you're in the water or just darkness period, if you're in absolute total darkness, which is just absence of light, when you're in absolute total darkness, you can't even get your bearings. Right? If again, like if we shut off all the lights and locked the doors and all that stuff and just stood here and I move you around and I'm like, walk down the aisle, we wouldn't be able to without running into something because we lose all bearing, right? It's the same thing with the water. That's one of the reasons why it's so hard for people that are drowning, because once you're down, you don't know which way's up. And the darkness, you can't, if you get to the point where it's so dark that you can't see stuff, that's that feeling that they're going to have. I don't want to get too many verses, but I'll just.
When you stop and think about it, that is going to be a wicked feeling.
Oh yeah. You don't have to go there, but I just want you to think about this. When in 2 Corinthians 11, when Paul talks about when God spoke and said, "Let there be light," light shined out of the darkness. Think about that for a second. It's not that the light shone into, the light shone out of the darkness. That was before the sun, moon, and stars was there. And it's just His word was enough to say, "Let there be light," and light shone out of darkness. And so then you think about those things, and you don't have to go there, but Acts 17. One of the things that we've talked about before is with the local assembly, one of the purposes of it is verse 26, Acts 17:26, "And hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the earth, the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if happily they might feel after Him and find Him, though He be not far from any one of us." The idea of they're in such darkness, and He says, "I'm going to put my life in this earth at some point to be able to, so that if people seek me, if happily they feel for Him," because they can't see, they're having to feel for it, right? That same idea of that darkness. Notice here in Jeremiah 13, and this should kind of remind us of something as well. Jeremiah 13, notice here in verse 15. "Hear ye and give ear, be not proud, for the Lord hath spoken. Give glory to the Lord your God, before He cause darkness, and before your feet stumble upon the dark mountains. And while ye look for light, He turn it into the shadow of death, and make it gross darkness." Now, when you think about that issue of the shadow of death, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? How about Psalm 23? All right. Go get Psalm 23.
What's it called? I can't think.
Psalm 23. To take Psalm 23 and turn it into what most people turn it into. Notice Psalm 23, verse 1, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for Thou art with me. Thy rod and Thy staff, they comfort me." When people come along and say, well, Psalm 23, when you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, when you're walking through your problems, God's going to get you through. He's going to bring you through. Just pray Psalm 23 and He's going to get you through your problems. Folks, he's not talking about your problems. He's talking about what he's talking about over there in Jeremiah 13. He's talking about this time. What are those people during that time going to have to rely on? The Lord who is their shepherd. And what's he going to do? He's going to what? He's going to lead them. He's going to restore their soul. He's going to lead them in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. How? Through that book. And he says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, they're going to be in that time period where it's gross darkness. And what's their response going to be? I will fear no evil. Why? For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Yes, Raymond.
Oh, I was looking at Psalm 27:1. The Lord is my salvation, which shall I fear?
Mm-hmm. And that's the point, right? Who do they know the light is? They know Christ is the light, right? What are they looking forward to when the Son of Righteousness shall arise? They know that he's coming back. They believe the verses.
When you say they, is this
The believers. Yeah.
Just the Jewish nation.
Well, whoever would be in that believing. Well, and those who are part of that Jewish nation by faith, yeah. Yeah. Because once even with a Gentile who's converted into it, they're still going to be part of that little flock and all that too. They'll all of them be part of it, yeah.
But if you're just talking about operates the way I always look at it, this is when Satan is cast down to earth and then he's leading them into that place of safety.
That's part of it, yeah. 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 Well, it is, but I mean, you've got all those that have believed, and they're part of that little flock at that time, yeah.
So they could never apply this to any other part of their history.
No. But I mean, and the thing is, you see there is, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And again, you think about that, what Raymond brought up in Psalm 27. He says, what? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, and whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, come upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumble and fail. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise up against me, in this will I be confident. When you think about those things, that's stuff that they're going to be dealing with out here. And their response to it is what? No matter what's going on around me, guess what? I know the Son of Righteousness is going to arise. And it's one of those things you think about that stuff, right? Genesis chapter 15. This is another one of those that just kind of always made me think anyway. Genesis chapter 15. This is after Genesis chapter 12, right? This is before Genesis 17, where Abraham is circumcised. This is something that God does with Abraham. And notice, let's just drop down to verse 7. And he said unto him, well, verse 6, because we need that one, right? So God speaking to Abram at this time, and he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. And he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? And he said unto him, take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against the other, but the birds divided he not. And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away. And when the sun was going down, now stop there for a second. How often do we see in Scripture about fowls being satanic beings. We saw that with the parables and all that stuff. What is it that they're trying to do here is try to prevent what's going on. Abraham does what? Drives them away. Verse 12, and when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. Now, the thing we talked about when we're going through this is Abram's asleep. He's in a deep sleep. Is there anything that he can do to perform here? No. And so what God's showing through Abram here is God does what he does here by grace. Notice, and lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. Now, that statement, that phrase has just always been one that just kind of, I mean, you think about where we are here. A deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he's, verse 12, Genesis 15:12. Verse 13, and he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come up out of with great substance. And of course, we talked about that a little bit. He goes down through here, and he does this, and he's making this covenant. What's interesting is Abram's asleep. There's nothing that he can do at this particular time, and God's doing all this. But that phrase, when a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. That phrase just always, it's one of those things. Can you imagine darkness that dark? It's hard for us to imagine it.
He wasn't talking about the 400 years of slavery and that he's dreaming this. I mean, he says a horror of darkness, and then he says, he told him that, you're going to have 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the way I always look at it.
Yeah, it is. It is. That's why I said, like, when you look at the affliction and all the stuff that Israel was going through in Egypt, it was a darkness that could be felt. Right? That's that same kind of idea. And he's showing Abram, here's what's going to be taking place. Right? So when you look at that judgment that ends up being on, well, what ends up being on Egypt as they come out, as Israel comes out, because that's what he says, right? Verse 14, and that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and after they come out with great substance. And that's what he's pointing to. He's showing them he's bringing them out, right? He's going to bring out that nation. The nation that they serve, he's going to destroy them. What's he doing out here? He's going to bring them through. In the middle of the tribulation, he says, go in the mountains and I'm going to feed you. And what's he do? He's going to feed them. He's going to bring them through. Son's going to come back and they're going to go into that kingdom. Same thing, same way that he saved Israel out of that darkness, he's going to save Israel through that darkness as well. To me, it's amazing when you think about that stuff. None of that stuff's happened yet, which tells us it's all still what? It's all still future. Right? I got a bunch of them here that I want to get through. We'll see if we can. Go get Hosea chapter 6. Yes, way, Jose. There was a verse in Joel 3:16. If you want to write that down, I forgot to go to, but I just happened to see it when I was flipping through. But Hosea chapter 6. We've already looked at Malachi 4, but notice Hosea chapter 6, verse 1. Come and let us return unto the Lord, for he hath torn, and he will heal us. He hath smitten, and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us. In the third day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. Then shall we know, if we follow on to know the Lord, his going forth is prepared as the morning, and he shall come unto us as the rain, as the latter and the former rain unto the earth. Now, what he's talking about there is what? What's going to happen when the darkness is gone, the light comes back? It's as if you've gone into the day, and he brings up the issue of it's like his going forth is prepared as the morning, and he shall come unto us as the rain, as the latter and the former rain unto the earth. And what did he do in the latter rain and the former rain is, what did he bring through? Light was on the other side, right? The light comes back, you have that light. So you see it, that second coming is also referred to as kind of like a morning after the day, or after the night. Ezekiel chapter 1. Ezekiel chapter 1. And it's just complete flipped, right? Darkness, 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 light comes back. Ezekiel chapter 1, verse... Let's just jump down to verse 27. To me, this is one of those things. Just kind of, if you want to get a good idea of the rainbow and all the things that go along with that, you can see some of that stuff. Notice in starting in verse 27, and I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about it, or within it, from the appearance of his loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward. And I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and had brightness round about, as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard a voice of one that spake. When he talks about that issue in verse 28, as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain, the greatest reference that we have to that is the bow after the flood. And so then, as we've seen, he put that rainbow out there as a reminder that he's never going to destroy the earth with water again. And so then we see this, he says, as the appearance of the bow that was in the cloud in the day of rain, so was also the appearance of the brightness round about. And I love this. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. Well, when is it that you see a rainbow? Is right after a good hard rain, the light comes out. Again, we see that issue of the rain and the darkness and the water and all that stuff, and then you've got light shining. 2 Samuel chapter 23. Oh yeah, right. Yeah. You love it when you learn the Bible and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, all that stuff that used to not make sense, all of a sudden, wait a minute, that's not what that was at all. It's completely something different. Yeah. 2 Samuel chapter 23. It's the same type of thing. Notice what we've got here. Verse 1. Now these be the last words of David. David the son of Jesse said, and the man who was raised up on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel said, the Spirit of the Lord spake by me, and his word was in my tongue. The God of Israel said, the rock of Israel spake to me. He that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God, and he shall be as the light of the what? The morning, when the sun riseth, even a morning without clouds, as the tender grass springeth out of the earth by clear shining after rain. I mean, we see this stuff over and over and over again, right? If you want to write these down, because just for time's sake, we won't go through all these. Solomon chapter 2, verse 11. Same type of thing. Psalm 72, verses 6 and 7. Psalm 68:9 and Judges 5:4. We see that over and over and over again. We see how that second coming is referred to or likened as a morning after a rainstorm, and the cloud or not the clouds, but the rainbow and all that stuff. You see that, which is complete stark contrast to all the darkness that we just get through talking about here. Right? Darkness is gone because the light's here. Yeah.
At what point does the complete darkness come into play?
Well, they're in darkness already, and it just gets darker and darker and darker.
But it's literal darkness.
Yeah.
You could even say that most of Christianity or religion is in darkness now.
Yeah. Yeah, a spiritual darkness already, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when the moon, sun is like blotted out,
It's immediately after the tribulation of those days, sun and moon and stars, that's darkness at the end of it.
okay,
Right? Because it's immediately after the tribulation of those days, darkness, sun and moon and stars and all that stuff, yeah.
where's their light for how long?
I don't know if it says, because he's coming back. There's things that he's doing on his way back. By the time he gets back over here, it goes from absolute darkness, not just spiritual but physical, and then he shows up,
And then there's
light.
So it's parallel to lightness in the very beginning where there's light, but
Mhm.
there's no source of light.
Hmm.
You know, well, he's the source of light,
He would be the source, yeah.
and then his word was the source of light in the beginning, which he and the word are one and the same.
Well, and again, when you think about at the beginning, he says, "Let there be light." There's light before sun, moon, and stars. And so then before the light comes back, sun, moon, and stars no longer give their light,
That's what I was saying.
right? And then the light shows up. Yeah.
It's the light personified, and that's the light in the word.
Hmm. Yeah.
It is kind of just like, it's kind of a mirror.
Hmm.
Kind of a mirror image.
It is. Yeah. And you see that over and over and over again, right? Back over in Matthew 24. I know we're about done time wise anyway, but when he's talking about in verse 29, he says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken." There's I don't see that being Revelation chapter 12, because Revelation chapter 12 we talked about was out here. This would be out there. That's at that time. But you know, when we start putting all that stuff out, he says, what happens to the sun, the moon, and the stars, as well as the powers of heaven, what's taking place with all that stuff. He says the sun's darkened, the moon shall not give her light, stars shall fall from heaven, the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And in verse 30, because this is their question, "And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." Because that was their question, right? What shall be the sign of thy coming? And he says, what in verse 30? Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man. He's telling them what? You've got tribulation. We've gone through the first half. We got into the second to the middle in verse 15. He says, he gets over here and he says what? Immediately after the tribulation of those days, here's what's going to take place. Verse 30, and then shall appear. What has to happen before the sign shows up? The sun, the moon, and stars and all that stuff give away their light. You have all that stuff that takes place, all the tribulation. All that stuff has to take place before that can show up. So when somebody comes along and says, well, that's a sign of his second coming, what can we say? You're 7 years too early. At most.
I asked the question before. Okay, it says immediately after, then shall the darkness be the sun and the moon after the tribulation.
Mm-hmm.
But during the tribulation, there's not gonna be a physical darkness, but a spiritual darkness,
Mhm.
more of the light.
Yeah, and that was kind of Delilah's question too. So yeah, you have that darkness there. Here, at the end of it, that's at the end of the tribulation. That's when all that darkness shows up, the physical. Then the sun comes back, and that's what he says. After that, after the tribulation of those days, all this is going to take place. Verse 30, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. So all that stuff has to take place before that sign even shows up.
What's the sign?
Well, he's going through all that stuff.
This is the sign of the Son of Man in heaven.
Shall appear in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth. We've got that, not yet, but yeah, we'll get to that because that's going to take more than a few minutes.
Isn't there some partial physical darkness though? I mean, at least like in Revelation 8, about the third of the sun, moon, stars being darkened.
What are you talking about?
Revelation 8, 12.
Chapter 8, verse 12. I think the Revelation 8:12 would be talking about the chapter 12 in the middle of it, because that should go with chapter 12. The third of the stars cast down in chapter 12, which would be the middle. So, and there when he's talking about the stars, because he talks about the fourth angel, and I see what you're saying. The fourth angel, Revelation 8:12. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and third part of the moon, and third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. Maybe a partial. Yeah, I mean, you got the day there. He talks about the day shone not for a third part of it as well. And the night likewise, so possibly, as far as like the length of time that the light's out, yeah.
Does it seem like almost the spiritual and physical darkness of the tribulation is like dimming, so by the time at the end, it's like the darkness is going to be.
Yeah.
When he appears, he's the brightest he's going to be.
Yeah.
Because you can't see anything, it's dark.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the point we were talking about earlier. Is like it's dark, but it's getting darker and darker and darker. Yeah, so yeah, I could see that.
You would have the complete and utter darkness after all of your light sources are gone.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. So yeah, you could do that too. I wouldn't be opposed to that.
I just think it's cool in the beginning, there's darkness, light source, and then it goes,
Yeah,
light sources are gone, total darkness, and then light comes back.
yeah. Just so I can. Just so I can completely not just throw you out, Delilah. Go over to Mark 14.
Just a little.
Well, she asked, and then she turned to Haley and was like, blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
No,
no,
I'm
don't
just-
worry
I
about it.
know.
Don't worry about that.
I know.
Seriously, you have to call me out all the
Yes.
time.
Everybody on the internet now knows
I
that,
didn't do anything.
yeah. Right. So, Mark 14.
I'm not gonna turn on there because I'm afraid to be bad.
No, so she was like, so what is the sign? Here you go. Mark 14, 61.
You just told me to read, or can you try to find it for next week?
Well, no, that's fine. So Mark 14, 61. But he held his peace and answered nothing. Again, the high priest asked him and said unto him, Art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am, and ye shall see the Son of Man, what? Sitting on the right hand of power. That's Revelation chapter 6. So you can go read it. What's that next word?
Sitting in the clouds, or coming
And coming in the clouds of heaven, Revelation 19. So there you go.
But 24:27, that's not explaining the coming of the Lord.
I'm sorry, what?
Matthew 24:27, when he says he's going to be as the light when coming out of the east and shining even into the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be.
Yeah.
Not the sign that he's talking about over in 29 or 30 or whatever it is.
That all that's together, yeah. 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 Yeah.
No, it's total darkness.
Even though it's total darkness,
Then he's going to
then he shows up and they're going to see it all. And yeah. And then they're going to see that sign of his coming. I mean, again, you think like what Raymond's talking about is like, that's going to be the brightest that he shines, because even a light that's small shines pretty bright in real darkness, but his light that's coming back, it's going to be even brighter than that. And I mean, think about, if we shut out all the lights here, we turn on the light here, we see it here, but we also see the light out in the hallway, right? So you're seeing the whole thing. But when he shows up and you see him sitting at the right hand of God the Father, right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven, they're going to see him, not just the light and the glory of it, but they're going to see him.
They're going to see him in a seated position first.
Yeah.
Is he going to come in a seated position?
Well, according to that, he would be.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, at the end of the tribulation, the sun and the moon and the stars is already dark,
Yep.
and he is the light.
Mm-hmm.
Satan, you grab Satan and throw him into the pit
Mm-hmm.
for 1,000 years. Does the sun and the moon come back, or is he the light for that time?
He would be the light. Yep.
There would be no sun and moon during that period.
You wouldn't need it at that time. Yeah.
Kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh?
Well, it's still a sunburn.
Oh. Yeah.
He doesn't give off UV rays, okay?
Just for those that are watching that would like to know, Haley just dad joked the dad joker here. But I mean, and that's the thing, right? It's like absolute, complete, total darkness, and he shows up, and they're gonna witness it from every place on earth. They're gonna be able to see it, and that when they see him seated and coming in the clouds, that's what you'll see. And we'll get into that a little bit more next time, but yeah, we'll see that.
Have you ever thought that Satan did? I know this ain't part of the things I think about. He gets cast into the pit, into the dark pit, for 1,000
Mhm.
years. And then at the end of that, he comes out swinging. Like
Yeah.
he still got something.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I mean,
And he knows the end of the story.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but he doesn't believe it though, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
he's been thrown into a pit for 1,000 years into darkness,
Yeah.
and he comes out swinging. He's like, okay, where's my fruit?
Yeah. Yeah. And he's going to have some.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like, so there's a series that I've put together and we've just not done it yet, discussing hell. And one of the titles, and I'll say this and somebody will steal it, but I don't care. It's a really good title. I just want to use it. Yeah, it's copyrighted, trademarked, Greg Reeser, 2025. No. So one of the things that we see about Satan is he was the anointed chair that covered the throne in the sides of the north. And he's going to be cast down in the sides of the pit. That's a long fall. From the sides of the north to the sides of the pit. It's a long fall. And he still thinks, I will be like the Most High. I will ascend above the cloud and all that stuff. He still thinks that.
And what's awesome is that he's gonna see Christ coming. He's gonna be a witness to it.
He'll be a witness to it. So yeah, you're talking about that 1,000-year reign where Satan's going to be cast down in the bottomless pit. He's going to be loosed for a little season. And then what happens is Christ sends it all away. Still part of his wisdom to show his wisdom. Because he could have, we said before, he could have just destroyed Satan the moment that he fell. But what he's putting on display is his wisdom. And he's saying, there's still people out there. God still has a chance to save them.
Or he's giving those people a chance to make a choice.
He's giving them mercy.
It's still mercy.
To do that,
It's
yeah.
still mercy to the very end.
Yeah,
Even if everybody knows.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then there's going to come a time where he cuts it off. Satan's tossed into the bottomless pit or the fiery furnace forever. That's just, but he gives them that one because there's going to be people during this time that are born and living during that time period. And what's interesting is you go over and take a look at passages in the Old Testament, and Israel's going to have a song, and part of their song is, this is the guy that weakened the nations. This one. This is who everybody was afraid of. You talk about ego kick.
He had a black cross on his forehead.
He had a black cross on his forehead today. That's where it comes from, right? But I mean, you look at all that stuff, and it's like, they're one day they're going to say, "That's the one, this guy." That's
So, was Satan trying to be like the Most High? Would that possibly have anything to do with why Jesus says, I am the Alpha and Omega? As in trying to say, you know, I'm the first and last, I'm the only God.
yeah, yeah. And he says it more ways than not in the Old Testament as well. The same thing, right? Basically, he says, "I've been everywhere. I've seen everything. I've done it all. No one's out there like me." And Satan says, "Well, I'm going to be like you." And he says, "I've already been there. You weren't there. You were down in that fire." He knows the end of it. The difference is, like I said, Satan knows the verses, but he doesn't believe them. Right? And that's the big difference.
Remind me again where Satan is in the very end.
Revelation. $20. Huh? Yeah.
Well, pray for the Mormons.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Oh yeah. And there's parts before this, but verse 7, chapter 20, verse 7. "And when 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea." He's going to have a lot of people. "And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about in the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them." Just that quick. "And the devil that deceived them was cast in the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever." And then he talks about the great white throne judgment. And then
So is that hell?
lake of fire and brimstone. Hell's cast into it.
Hell is cast into the lake of fire.
Yeah.
Because hell is created for the Satan and his angels.
Yeah, and we've mentioned that before. The purpose, you're just bound and determined to not get out, right?
I have a nap.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Right? This goes back. So it's all on video this time. Heaven and earth. Who was there when he was creating the earth? At that time, Lucifer and all that stuff, all the angels, they were doing what? Rejoicing as he laid the foundation of the earth. What happens is Satan says, I will be like the Most High. I will ascend above, and I will be like the Most High. And so he takes that and he presents that information to angels in the heaven and angels on earth. And what happens is he says, come and be with me, bow down to me. Same thing he says to Christ, right? Now, what was your question again?
Well, I was saying hell was created for Satan and his angels.
Yeah. So when Satan goes out to the angels up here in heaven and angels here on earth, what's he saying? Come follow me. And God says, well, I'm going to create hell to stop it. We don't know any other time that he created hell. Matthew tells us that he created hell. He created it for who? Satan and his angels. To stop that rebellion right there. And that's why you see in Genesis 1:2, the earth is without form and void. That's why that happens. So when he created it, he would have to have created it. And he did it to stop that rebellion.
I always think about it like this. How many millions of years they did it take for Satan to convince the earth of the angels, and a lot of them were archangels.
Mm-hmm. All the angelic hosts, seraphim and cherubim,
And you think God just stood back and watched them.
because he gave them free choice, right?
Did it take 8 years? Did it take 5 years? I mean, you could.
You don't know. Yeah. That's why, like I said last week, that's one of the reasons why when somebody says, well, let's talk about the gap, I'm like, I'm not going to talk about time because I don't know about time, but I know there's a rebellion.
Utter destruction since
He says, I've created hell for Satan and his angels. And that was done to stop that rebellion. And that's why we see destruction there. That's why we see the heaven, I'm talking about the second heaven, is unclean in his sight. Third heaven still untouched. Both those places are corrupted.
So why wasn't Satan and his angels sent to hell right then?
His wisdom.
I know,
His
okay, I
plan.
figured that's what you were going to say.
It's his plan. His plan comes to fruition
So
where
did
out here,
Satan and his angels ever go to hell? It says the lake of fire.
well, death and hell and all that's going to be cast into it. So they're going to be, that's going to be the end of it all.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If hell was created for Satan and his angels, they actually...
Some are there, yeah. Yeah, some are there. There, when you talk about that second, oh man,
Okay, never mind. Stop.
no,
Stop.
I should have just,
Going any further.
no, no, you're fine.
No, because we need to go.
No, you're fine, you're fine.
Don't
It's
drag
too
it.
late now, it's too late.
No, because some people might want to leave.
Well,
Don't.
no, that's fine.
Please don't.
It's almost as sad as thinking that in that 1,000-year reign, all those people are going to turn their back. Satan's cast into the
Yeah,
pit.
yeah.
He's not even
Around.
around.
Yeah,
And still there's going to be who knows how many people.
It's almost
Yeah.
8:30
that's fine,
later.
that's fine. So they're held captive behind bars in the second heaven. They're chained there, all that stuff, right? So there are those that are there. You also have the ones in Jude he talks about, the ones that left their first estate, they're in chains and all that stuff. You've got the ones that commit fornication with women in Genesis chapter 6. There's something to do with them. What God's going to do there is he's created it for Satan and his angels. A lot of them, they're up there, they're in bars and chains and all that stuff. He's going to cast them into the pit for 1,000 years, then he's going to cast them into the lake of fire and completely do away. Jupiter? No, I don't know. No.
That'd be a good thing to think
No. But I mean, you think about he's cast into the bottomless pit. And just think about that for a second. It's a pit that has no bottom,
Yeah.
And it's dark.
and it's dark. And the farther you get down, what are you in? More darkness. So what they're going to be going through, that's what they're going to live with for eternity. But yeah,
Weeping and wailing, outer darkness, where there's weeping and wailing, gnashing of teeth, and the working of iniquity.
yeah, it is, and that's what he gets into over here in Romans, right? Or Matthew.
Eternal judgment studies.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what he's getting ready to start talking about in chapter 25, right? About the outer darkness or the utter darkness and all that stuff. So he's getting ready to talk about all those things. But yeah, that. So no, you're fine. It's just
I know, I don't want to drag it out.
no, you're good.
It's not as simple as.
It's not. It's not.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah.
fascinating to think that, what, why would everybody be saved, you know?
Yeah.
But the problem is, a lot of people do think they're saved.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, it's like, so I was telling Delilah, so I was subbing over at the Christian Academy today, and today's when they did middle school and high school chapel, and they had a guy there from a church here in town, and he spends the 35 minutes talking about, well, he looked like he's about 18, but anyway, he's the youth pastor at a church here in town, and he's like, he spends that time, he talks about the Pharisee and the tax collector. One's justified rather than the other because, forgive me, I'm a sinner and all that. So he goes through all that stuff, and he's like, all of us are sinners. No gospel. And I'm like, that's your perfect chance. Because that's step one. You're right. That's step one.
Right.
But you can't stop there. And you have an audience of students there that they need to hear that. And there was no gospel given. And it's that idea of, well, if you just say, be merciful to me, a sinner, that's the idea that's behind all that. And that's why people go to that verse, the sinner's prayer, right? And that's what he was going after. He didn't get there to make that conclusion, if you will. But I mean, and that tells me that he doesn't know. And that's scary because he's leading youth at a church here in town. But I don't know. They've said they may ask me to come do it one day. And they were like, "We no longer need you to sub either." No, but I mean, no. It is fascinating to think about all that stuff and understand those things in context of what's going on. And no matter how bad we think things are right now, it's going to be much worse. We can't afford eggs. Out there, guess what? You're not even going to get them, much less try to afford them. I mean, we can't imagine what that's going to be like. But yeah, good stuff. All right. We actually got farther tonight than we did last week, and we still got the same stuff kind of in. So, yeah. Always enjoy questions. All right, but verse 30, we'll pick up with verse 30 next time. So, any other questions, comments, concerns?